Okay, so we'll continue now with our first talk. Our first talk is actually a panel, and we have here our guests. I'll introduce Andrada Fiscutean first. Hey, Andrada. Andrada is a great journalist, and she talked at Security Espresso before, and you will be moderating the panel tonight, so here you go.
Thank you so much, Anatol. Can you hear me well? Enough? Okay, perfect. So first of all, I would like to give a round of applause to the first speaker, to Dan, for an awesome talk earlier today. And one more round of applause for Anatol and Sabina, who because we are celebrating 2 years of Security Espresso today. And a third round of applause for our speakers today here in the panel. Thank you. Let me introduce you to Dumitra Dragoș, if you don't know her. She's the co-founder of BSidesBucharest community. And when she was a teenager, you were in high school, you wanted to become a sports journalist because you liked watching football. What is your favorite team?
In which country?
I don't know. Pick one.
Okay, so for tonight I cheer for, let's see, Manchester, Benfica, Real. Oh, sorry. So tonight I cheer for Benfica, Real, Manchester United. I think Bălan is playing as well, so should I continue with more countries?
Thank you so much. We also have Jay here. Jay works for Bitdefender. He started being a security evangelist when Red Hat 6.0 was state of the art. What year was it?
I think it was about 1999, 1998. I don't know how many of you remember Red Hat. I think Red Hat 6.0. Okay, and do you remember the FTP server embedded in Red Hat 6.0? It was known to provide remote root access since 1998, yeah.
But what I like about Jay is that he's the perfect security researcher a journalist would like to talk to, because I once called him at 10:30 p.m. and he answered, and he's really involved in social causes in Romania.
For most of us, that's practically morning.
And we also have a special guest tonight. Let's welcome Nate Lee from Tradeshift. He's in charge of security for this unicorn that's having quite a big team in Romania. You have about 150 people.
Something like that, yeah?
Yeah, working for you. How long was your flight? Because you came here from San Francisco,
yeah,
right?
It was about 24 hours, door to door. I think I landed last night at 1 in the morning.
And I also have a fun fact from Nate. You were in 6th grade when
I probably should have thought this through before I gave that one to you. But
so you were in 6th grade when your teachers wanted to do something about your future?
They did, yes. They tried to put me in special education. It's true. It didn't happen. Yeah. I didn't luck out.
So since you have the microphone, if you were to remember just one thing that happened in everything related to security this year, what would that thing be? What's the takeaway for 2018? Because we're getting ready to wrap up the year.
So, and this might be a reflection of my short-term memory, but actually I think the recent NPM event where Flat Matt Stream was, someone had taken over control of the project and pushed that up, kind of really showed a lot of the weaknesses in how much we trust third-party code that we're loading and building and running, and it's not getting a lot of visibility. I think that's probably going to be a much larger issue in the future. Mm-hmm.
I would also like to ask Dumitra the same thing. What's your takeaway?
My takeaway for this year is that default configs are worse than attackers for our security posture.
And Jay? What have you noticed at Bitdefender this year?
At Bitdefender? Sorry, I cannot confirm or deny any such information.
I know, you can neither confirm nor deny.
I guess the fact that GitHub got hacked. Oh, that's not public yet, sorry. Obviously there's the Marriott, was it? hack, yeah, where they purchased a hotel chain and that hotel chain got hacked. Was that a surprise for anybody? No. So I guess that's not that big of a news, right? Or Quora got hacked. Was that a surprise for anybody? So I guess one of the key takeaways for 2018 is that big companies getting hacked is not a surprise to anybody anymore.
And what was your main challenge, the main challenge that you faced?
Well, personally, amongst other things that I do is I manage a bug bounty program for Bitdefender. And I have to admit there's still this struggle between some critical issue, not necessarily critical, but an issue getting reported and then the time to fix. So I have to admit that's still a struggle that we have. I guess most companies have internally. But to the point of bug bounties, because I guess I'm going to touch on that at some point later on, I'm happy to see that more and more companies adopt the concept of ethical hacking. And there's more and more companies that appear on Bugcrowd, that appear on HackerOne, or running programs of their own. So I guess 2018 was an explosion in this area as well, and I'm very, very happy for that.
Okay, let's remember the bug bounty program that you remember, because we're going to get back to it in a few minutes. But I would like to also ask Nate, what was your biggest challenge this year? Because you're the security guy in charge of everything at a startup that's doing some, I don't know, crazy amounts of financial transactions.
Yeah, I think, I mean, there's all the different technical challenge, but I think a lot of it also comes down to people. I mean, most of my team is sitting out here as well, and some of the things, like even just basic stuff like running phishing tests. We send out some fake emails to people. If you tell them that the attachment has everyone's salary in it, they're going to open it. I mean, we get better click-through rates than the marketing team. So I think people, it's just the easiest path in most of the time.
Yeah. How about you, Dumitra? Your biggest challenge, from your point of view?
Biggest challenge?
Yeah.
Well, I work in a company that tries to adopt the newest technology to be able to process petabytes of data every second. So keeping up with all the new shiny toys and a way to secure it was my biggest challenge this year. Because, yeah, that's why I mentioned default configs. We all know Docker, Kubernetes, and all those goodies.
I would go back to Jay a bit.
Yeah, I think it's also worth mentioning the struggle that we've had with vendors. So we do have a few labs that do vulnerability research on stuff that's not ours necessarily. Obviously, to make the internet a better place and for some PR attention of our own. And we've struggled a lot with vendors that had literally hundreds of thousands. Some of them had more than 500,000 devices in the market with RCs in all of them. And we had a lot of difficulties getting in touch with them to get them to fix their stuff and get their customers out of danger. We even ended up talking to their supply chain managers. I mean, to the likes of Best Buy and so on and so forth, to try to get Best Buy to talk to them. And that was, again, a really, really big struggle to get in touch with the vendors and get them to be aware of the vulnerabilities that they had in their products. Again, big names, hundreds of thousands, if not millions, put together devices that are affected.
You mentioned bug bounty programs before. Are they efficient from your point of view? Because I've seen a lot of people talking about this on Twitter this year, saying that many companies do adopt bug bounty programs, but they just check a couple of things, having a false feeling of security. What do you feel about that?
So it's a tough pill to swallow. I mean, for you guys, it's much easier, and this is probably not necessarily the best audience, honestly, to pitch this kind of ideas, because everybody has pretty much the same mindset in this room. But I was doing this talk at a healthcare convention about a month ago in Brașov, and I asked the audience, all of them were hospital directors, pharmaceutical company directors, and I asked them, somebody tells you that they've hacked your infrastructure and they've managed to access the database with your customers or with your patients. Do you report them to the police? And unfortunately, there were like 4 or 5 hands raised in the audience. And as scary as this sounds, the fact that the guy told them about it is a big step forward from somebody just going through and publishing the database on the deep web. So the whole concept of ethical hacking and legislature, first of all, needs to be regulated. The Bitdefender bug bounty program is wildcard. Anything that has the Bitdefender name on it is in scope of the bug bounty program. And as it turns out, you learn so much about the creativity of hackers and the creativity of researchers when you're running a bug bounty program. And obviously, you learn the thing that you should know as a security researcher, that the thing that you know for a fact is that you don't know everything, right? And there's so many ways in which you can get hacked, and there's so many ways in which your assets can get compromised, and learning about them through the bug bounty program is literally the only way you can learn about all the things that can happen to you.
What do you think that should be changed in terms of regulations or policy when it comes to ethical hacking? Do you think, is there a way to make it safer?
I have a very unpopular opinion on that.
Oh, we'd love to hear that.
So, if you think about black hats, gray hats, white hats, yellow hats, green hats, rainbow hats, and so on and so forth, my personal position is leveling the playing field and allowing ethical hacking all the way. So that means that if I want to test I don't know, techhub.ro, right, and pen test it and fully evaluate it and try to hack into it, I should be allowed to do it, as long as I'm doing responsible disclosure. Arguably, this is, again, a much harder pill to swallow for law enforcement. However, there's a chance that I will tell you about it, right? So it's a better chance than somebody else doing it and not telling you about it. So that's kind of my position on that. It's a very difficult case to make. I was actually doing this conference in Nepal just 2 weeks ago, and the government was in the audience. And they did a panel like this one, and I asked the Nepali government what they do about allowing ethical hacking and what they do about, you know, making sure that the infrastructure is essentially that makes your infrastructure and your assets more secure by allowing people to hack them and telling you about it. You know, it's like Schrödinger's vulnerability, as I always like to say. It's just the fact that you didn't discover it doesn't mean it's not there. And the moment you discover it doesn't mean that's the moment it appeared. It was there a long time before you discovered it, and people might have exploited it for a long time, right? So, and the Nepali government said that they're looking into it, but the audience, there were like a few hundred people in the room, all of them started to cheer and all of them started to clap their hands and said that yes, they want to be allowed to do it legally and ethically.
I would also like to ask Nate, what is your opinion on this? Do you agree with what Jay said, or on the contrary?
I'm a huge fan of bug bounty programs. I mean, I think for us it's been by far the biggest thing that we've done to improve security on the platform. We had pen tests because customers want them, but pen tests turn up 6 or 7 bugs. I think when we first turned on the bug bounty program, it was to 5 or 10 people, and poor Eric over there got an avalanche dumped on his head. So yeah, I mean, it's been super helpful. I think when it comes to regulation, I would say that I agree that you should be able to test, excuse me, you should be able to test anything you want and be able to disclose it. I think the regulations have to take into account, people will obviously try to abuse that to maliciously hack and then I guess not do disclosure, so making sure that there's clear guidelines that everyone is able to agree to and you know, set that out so there's just like clear rules and a playing field for everyone.
When I watched Dan's talk earlier this evening, for a fraction of a second I thought of Edward Snowden, and I felt that, well, in 2018 it might be I know, increasingly difficult to be a whistleblower, and maybe things are going to get even harder next year or in the following years. And as a journalist, this is a problem to me. How do you feel that? Is it becoming more difficult to be a whistleblower, or what are the issues there?
Yeah, I mean, clearly they're looking to make an example of people, and with the amount of different ways you can have things tracked back to you and different ways that they can bend the law to try to penalize whistleblowers. I think it's more dangerous and risky than ever, which also makes many of these people more and more brave. And I mean, it takes a lot of guts to do some of the, if you think something is morally incorrect and leaking that out, knowing you're basically forfeiting your life like Edward Snowden did. I mean, he's got to live somewhere else, can't see his family anymore. So also the amount of bits of OPSEC you have to get right to do some of these leaking, that's hard stuff. Reality Winners sent the documents to The Intercept, and they sent them back to the NSA, and she got caught by printer code. So it's kind of, that's a lot of stuff to keep track of.
Yeah, and as far as I remember, I think Snowden needed 2 months in order to teach the journalists all the OPSEC routine required. Do you think we should do something in order to encourage people to speak up as a society? Should the tech sector come up with, I don't know, some creative ideas?
Yeah, I mean, I think we should do more. I mean, obviously, transparency, you can't make great decisions as a democracy unless you have transparency and you know what's happening, right? So there are some tools, I can't remember who developed them, but tools for anonymous submissions and things like that. But again, still, there's so many ways that can go wrong if you miss one little thing that, I mean, it really puts people at risk. And I think maybe to Dan's earlier talk, some of the stuff around manipulation of opinion on a mass scale. If you can turn the public against whistleblowers, that they're traitors and all of these things, then it makes it much easier. You don't even have to, penalize them directly. The people will do that for you. So I think there's many challenges to opening it up more.
I know that in your office in Romania, you're developing some sort of AI.
Yes,
because
the
I saw a
robots.
presentation, yes. And I would like to, I mean, a lot of people in cybersecurity talk about AI and machine learning. And how do you feel about these new, well, not quite new, but yeah, I don't know, fashionable technologies?
Very fashionable.
Yeah.
I mean, I think in general, a lot of times, there's the marketing layer that gets thickly coated on top of all of that. It's going to help kind of everything, especially a lot of these things that deal with high volume, right? For us, we do a lot of business transactions, so there's millions of documents, and if you're trying to figure out whatever you have to code an invoice with, that's the perfect sort of repeatable task for a bot or AI or machine learning. On the security side, I think anyone with a SOC that is getting all those alerts, same sort of thing. If you have 50,000 alerts or 1 million alerts, having something that can make sense of that at scale and use context to help your team is obviously a very good thing.
Thank you. Dumitra, do you think that machine learning is hyped at the moment?
Yeah, it is. It's basically statistics. Statistics have been around for a while, but it's statistics in code, so it's fashionable. We call it machine learning, and then putting multiple models together, we call it artificial intelligence. But it does help triaging a lot of data. As I stated before, we need to look through petabytes of logs. So yeah, machine learning is really helpful to see outliers, to do clustering, to see what's out of the ordinary in your environment. You cannot track all the servers and all the users all the time. And in a server environment like the one I'm monitoring, attackers usually, they call it living by the land, so they use the sysadmin tools on the host. So it's getting even harder to detect a malicious act.
I'm going to take a couple of questions from the audience in 5 minutes, so do prepare if you have ideas. Also, I think Sabrina could help us with a couple of questions from our Telegram channel, if there are. But before that, I would like to ask you about the future of privacy. How do you feel about it? Because I feel that privacy is quite important for democracy, and we're expecting a couple of elections next year in several European countries.
I wish I could say that I believe in privacy, but seeing
don't.
all the but I don't. I believe in the fact that we no longer have privacy. I think that we're just a token in someone's marketing algorithm, and it's hard to block your content because it's not your username, it's not your IP. It's getting harder and harder. So I don't believe that we have privacy, but we can put more effort into how we take
Raise
the data.
the cost of
Yeah.
attack.
Exactly. Raise the cost of attack and also put more effort in analyzing all the data that's bombarding us and make our choices wisely.
Nate, what do you do to, I don't know, protect your privacy as much as you can?
I'm sure not enough, to your point. I mean, after a while I had to start, well, switch to like DuckDuckGo for browsing or using incognito mode, and a lot of that was, I kept getting freaked out because I'd search for something and the next day in the middle of whatever I'm reading, there's like a ad for rash ointment or something. So, so I mean, just knowing that all of this is going into some giant profile, I mean, as much as possible, trying to make things that less trackable to you, switching to Cloudflare's DNS on my phone and my computer, but I think at the end of the day, it's all semi an illusion. I'm sure Google just knows what IP I come from and logs that anyway, so.
How about you, Jay? Don't give us that look.
We're all just super depressing.
I'm not. I'm at peace with my overlords. So,
Acceptance is the last stage of grief.
I guess that
I'm not sure if this panel is useful or not, but at least we're having fun.
so I have this segregation of data policy in my mind where if I need something to be private, then I'm going to use the proper channels to make sure that that stuff is private, like Tor or Signal or whatever, right? Actually, I would have reasons not even to mistrust, you know, to not trust even Signal or Wire or Threema, whatever the fuck Threema is. And in the old days, we used to SSH in a server and use YTalk. Who here has ever heard of YTalk on Unix machines? Yeah. So if we wanted to talk something that we wanted to make sure it's actually really, really private, the only client and software that we would use would be SSH and YTalk, right? And for all intents and purposes, that's as secure as you can get, because anything else is just developed by somebody else, and nobody, as much as you want, nobody that does those thorough source code audits to make sure that the Signal or whatever doesn't leak data. But with that in mind, what I do is segregate the information. So I don't care about anything. I don't have a camera on my, I don't have a sticker on my camera. I use an iPhone, I use an Apple devices, and I don't care if marketing people track me and sell me stuff. Sorry. So I'm gonna be that person in the security industry that says that I don't care about my privacy in this regard. However, if there's something that has to be private, then in that particular moment, I make the effort and focus my efforts to make sure that that information stays private. So if I want to leak something, I'm going to do it properly, and I know how to do it, right? So that's kind of my approach on privacy. I've seen so many ways in which data gets leaked, and I actually did a talk on this at DEF Camp. Let me ask you something. How many of you care about privacy? Really? How much?
How should we respond to this?
Because so there's machine learning engines in the keyboards on our phones. So when we use our phones to communicate, there's machine learning in the keyboard software that learns what you're typing and sends that for correlation and aggregation and popular keywords and all that stuff to remote servers. There's so many mechanisms that we may or may not be aware of that track us, that no matter how much DuckDuckGo we use, we're still being tracked by other things, right?
So do you know what I tell to people who don't care about their privacy? And I've learned this from Glenn Greenwald, the journalist who covered the Snowden case. I watched the talk, and he said at some point, so if there's someone in this room who doesn't care about their privacy, then I would ask that person to email me their usernames and passwords for every account, and as a journalist, if I will find a story there, I will write it.
Well, arguably, that's a very far-stretched example. Because there's one thing to be profiled for marketing purposes, there's one thing to be profiled by Big Brother for whatever purposes they have. And I would say pick your battles. For example, in privacy, I would definitely start fighting very actively, and I would personally, actually, I want to do that, and I've actually talked to some members of the parliament in Australia. Australia wants to backdoor encryption. Now, that's a fight that's worth fighting, right, in terms of privacy. because that effectively decreases the security for everybody. Now, that I would get involved in, right? So, and UK has some projects for some ridiculous laws. Germany, same thing. Those are actually movements and some actions that I would want to be involved in. Again, personally, I will get involved in that.
Nate, I would like to talk to you a little bit about things in the US, because California pushed legislation for a low password this autumn, I think it was. And also there were talks about hackback. What do you think? Do you think that the security community is more aware of the things that could happen, or Silicon Valley in general tackled some issues that would have seen, I don't know, sci-fi a couple of years ago?
I'm not sure if Silicon Valley has any more insight, maybe more influence, but like clearly there's many, many mistakes coming out of Silicon Valley when it comes to privacy and protecting users. I mean, at the end of the day, most of those companies are trying to sell ads and make money, and that's kind of the top priority, and everything kind of shuffles somewhere lower than that. So great technical advances coming out of there, but not always with the best interest at heart. So from that end of things, I think you have to look at where different companies are motivated from and what their actual goals are when it comes to how they're driving technology out and how that affects people's privacy.
Okay, thank you. Do we have questions from the audience? Oh, great.
I would like to share my experience with with disclosing a critical vulnerability.
To Bitdefender.
No,
Okay.
to IBM.
I'm sorry, did I laugh out loud?
I wouldn't have expected this. A couple of weeks ago, during a penetration test, I have discovered a 0-day in one of their fiber channel switches. And of course, I went to IBM. They have a product security incident response team, which very promptly pointed me to HackerOne. Now, I didn't want to release it to HackerOne because one of the terms of the agreement is that you do not disclose it to anyone before they reach a conclusion. But I had to write my penetration test report, so at least I would have to disclose it to my customer. Nevertheless, I have created myself a HackerOne account. I have posted my report, and then, as you may imagine, there was an internal IP address, as in RFC 1918, like 192.168. I have posted 2 such private addresses, and I have been asked by a HackerOne staff member. I am having difficulties reaching this system.
No.
So you sold the 0-day to Zerodium?
No, I did not. But then someone else from IBM took over and said that they're no longer selling this product, so I should go to Lenovo. Rinse and repeat. Lenovo told me that actually it's a Marvel product which has acquired QLogic, which has created, yes, the firmware in the first place. Now the firmware is actually a embedded Linux. So there is not a serviceable operating system. You, as a user, as the owner of the device, you cannot just log onto the switch and update it yourself like a package manager or something. You have to update the firmware. But there is no security advisory. And actually it's a remote root. You instantly become root, no authentication. I mean, you don't have to be a user on that system or something. You just go there and you're root. And I know many customers will not update the firmware. You know, if it ain't broken, you won't fix it. So as we're speaking now, there are probably lots of such devices in the wild. And neither of those vendors would publish a security advisory, let alone a CVE or bug bounty. IBM does not pay money. I didn't care, but again, I believe they have the funds to...
Why don't you publish the CV yourself?
Because as an ethical hacker, I have to think about the customers who do not know about the vulnerability.
60 days, publish it, because what you find, so the whole concept of Schrödinger's vulnerability, well, my concept of Schrödinger's vulnerability, is what you found, somebody else will find as well. This is why it's important to make it public. I mean, you're a special person, but not that special, right? So tell me if what you found is not something that somebody else can find as well, right?
Absolutely.
So somebody else may not be so ethical about it and may start hacking the devices. So make it public.
Thank you.
There was another question there in the back.
Also not a question, but your remark about Australia trying to backdoor encryption reminded me of one of my favorite quotes from people who just don't get security. It was an Australian politician, if you want I can give you his name, who was told that encryption is governed by the laws of mathematics and they can't actually do or legislate whatever they want. And he said, and I quote from memory, "The laws of mathematics are commendable, but the only law that applies in Australia is the law of Australia."
Do we have more questions from the audience? Until you think of more questions to ask our audience, I do have one more question for Nate. There's a difference between Romania and the US when it comes to education. In the US, a lot of people have a major in a technology field. For instance, you major in computer science, and a minor, which often is from a totally different field, such as philosophy. In Romania, we don't have that. Do you think that people should talk more about what they do and to think about the philosophical issues that apply to technology? Because as I see it from where I'm standing, is that a lot of people in tech develop tools because they are cool to develop, but don't get to ponder on the potential consequences of that.
Yeah, and I think that's really important. I mean, kind of the point earlier about Silicon Valley only thinking about one thing. A lot of these people are brilliant technologists. They come up with great technology and these new services, but haven't really thought through the full scale of considerations of what happens with that. Like with Facebook causing polarization, Google allowing, well, I guess better marketing and classification of being able to deliver messages to people more efficiently. Twitter, same sort of thing with being able to spread disinformation much more quickly. And then even when some of these things are pointed out, a lot of these companies, I mean, they're still looking at the money, right? And they don't know what to do. You look at Facebook and Twitter, and they're maybe they care, but obviously ethics and some of these other things haven't really been embedded at a deep level with a lot of both the core executives and I mean, the engineers a lot of them are, kind of bright-eyed and they're excited to work at one of these companies, and they're going to go along for the ride. So, yeah, any amount of self-reflection that people can have about what they're doing, what they're building, obviously that's always going to be a good thing, I think.
Dumitra, do you agree with Nate or not?
Well, yeah, and I think I'm one of the exceptions in the tech industry. I actually finished political sciences, so I have that thought, and even when I listened to the earlier talk about manipulation, and then you mentioned whistleblowers and disclosing information, I think that another issue is that we do not think about our role when we disclose information. The fact that we might put some countries in an advantaged position. And also, when we do release 0 days or vulnerabilities, again, we might affect the game without knowing.
thing that I often think about, Nate, is that we often have to choose, well, an ethical dilemma, theoretically, is having to choose between something that is, I don't know, deontological, which often means not my business, and something that is utilitarian, which means it's something for the people. Do technologists in the US, I don't know, do you feel that they think a lot more about this stuff than we do, because they set the tone for the whole industry? Or what would you like them to think about in 2019?
I mean, I think it's just more of what could the impact be, and how are you going to deal with unforeseen impacts? I mean, with Uber, it was, hey, we're going to democratize travel, and it ends up that it increases driving in cities, which is causing more gridlock and pollution, and you have a bunch of contractors who aren't going to have benefits, and when autonomous driving comes in, these are all going to be people who haven't been on the job market for a decade, aren't going to have healthcare, aren't going to have sort of marketable skills. How are you going to deal with that? So I think there's the utilitarian side of like, hey, this is this great service, it's fun to use, and it's maybe convenient, but what's kind of the larger impact? And hopefully people are starting to take that into consideration in the design phase. But then also, you know, understanding that there might be unforeseen consequences of what we're building, and how are we going to deal with that in the future, especially if it goes against our profits.
If you were to have a beer with Mark Zuckerberg, what would be the thing that you would tell him? Because he had a tough year, to say the least.
Yeah, I'm not even sure, really. I mean, I think it's probably very hard for him, right? He's in, I'm sure, quite a bubble of where he's getting information from and his perspective, but I think it would probably be to go out and actually, yeah, I mean, like, see some of the impact that the product has had on well, all of globally, basically, as far as manipulation of people's thoughts through fake news or whatever, and how that's affected the world. And I mean, they give it lip service to how they're going to take it seriously and start working on that, but clearly that's not enough, right? They need to really step out of their comfort zone and make a decision. Is it profits only, or are we going to be doing things that might cut into profits in order to make a better world?
Awesome. I think there was one more question.
Yes. Yeah. I have not really a question, but let's say I want to engage with Jay over there and tell you my point of view regarding bug bounties and ethical hacking and all this kind of stuff. As a security person, I am very aware that we need to carefully regulate this, and we cannot let all the nutheads with a gun go on the street and start attacking businesses. So this needs to be very carefully regulated. So I'll give you an example. You have a door. What happens if 10 people try to pick your door? You could say, okay, that's fine. The door will survive. If 1,000 people try to pick your door, then probably the door will go down. And then, unfortunately for you and your business, you'll encounter losses. So you need to be very, let's say, aware that you are opening yourself to this kind of attacks when you say, I'm here, just throw everything at me. So that's why I'm saying it needs to be properly regulated and be an opt-in program, not let all the nutheads. Do you agree with this or not?
I disagree.
You disagree? Then let me know where you live, so I have a few friends we can pay a visit.
So, first of all, I just wanted to say, if I had a beer with Zuckerberg, I guess my first reaction would be, can I have your stuff? I mean, I would imagine that it's insanely tempting to try to process all the data that Facebook has. I cannot fathom how much restraint Zuckerberg has to have, if he has it, to not profile everybody in all the means possible, in all the ways possible. And I would drool over the overall graphs and statistics from Facebook users, definitely. To your point, there's one thing which would be a brute force attack, right? Like 10,000 people banging on my door, the door would collapse, right? That's a brute force attack, and that's a different situation.
You cannot control that. You just say to everyone, if you want to pick the door, I'm here. Just try to pick it.
Well, I think that the thing that needs to be regulated would be simply intent. If it's a malicious intent, you go to jail. If it's a non-malicious intent, you thank the person.
Hard to prove.
Well, definitely it's hard to prove, but if your door lock has a vulnerability that enables somebody to pick it, then the odds are that somebody with malicious intent will pick it and not tell you about it and rob your house, right? If you allow everybody...
I can accept that risk. What I cannot accept is 10,000 people trying to pick it, because that will DDoS my door.
Well, again, DDoS is not a good example, but
it will happen.
But it wouldn't, not necessarily, because there is a very good chance that all the bad guys are already trying to pick your door. So that's kind of where I'm getting at. So let's say that you're a high-profile company.
Yeah, but that's a crime.
Well, yeah, but you know, bad guys don't really care about that.
It's still a crime.
But again, bad guys and cyber criminal organizations don't really care about the law. And at this point, the law is handicapping people that want to help.
Yeah, but when I'm giving you a free out-of-jail ticket, then you can abuse it. Anyway, so you do not agree with my point of view?
Well, let's just say that not entirely.
Okay, fair enough. That's not a debate.
I do.
You do agree. Okay.
One last question.
I would actually say I think it does depend on intent. I do agree that there's difficulty proving it one way or another, because bad guys are, of course, going to try to hide if they can, to try to find a way to say, I wasn't trying to hack you to steal stuff. But to Jay's point, you're going to have 10,000 people trying to hack you anyway. So you saying you don't want that isn't going to stop anyone that is malicious anyway. So you're kind of only hurting yourself if you're trying to turn people away. I mean, which is your decision, of course, but...
One last question.
From an ethical point of view, what all of you think about the cyber agencies which find vulnerabilities and choose to use it in their own country's advantage rather than disclose it?
Oh, so does Romania have 0 days?
No, shadow brokers.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think it's a better example.
Yeah, I mean, for me, the idealist in me says, yes, you should turn those in and help the greater good. But realistically, right, they're spy agencies, and that's kind of their gig. So, yeah, I guess I'm torn both ways on it.
Double standard, anyone?
Yeah, I mean, well, I don't know if it's a double standard. It's just, in which sense? If I'm a spy, then yes, I'm going to, that might be what I'm going to do, but I'm not a spy, and so I would say, yes, you should share that out.
I guess to your point, you're putting people in jail for stuff that you're doing yourself, right? That's what it's, okay. But that's not the point. To your point, if there's a vulnerability in, random example, the SMB service in Windows, right? And you sit on it, the fact that that's bad. I mean, it doesn't matter if your intent is good. It doesn't matter if you're a patriot or whatever, or a spy, and you're trying to help your country. If the vulnerability is there, can be exploited, you can get full RC, then definitely it should be disclosed and fixed. I mean, that's like, there's no question around that. There's absolutely no way to go around that. If there's a critical vulnerability in a system, has to be disclosed, has to be fixed. Because as I was telling the other gentleman earlier, what you've discovered, Israel can discover, Russia can discover, other people can discover. Nobody's that special, and software is flawed, as we all know, right? Again, if the vulnerability was discovered, doesn't matter who discovered it. If you don't report it, you suck.
And on that note, we're going to close the panel. Thank you so much for being here, Jay, Nate. Thank you for flying 24 hours to come to Romania, and Dumitra. And I hope that we're all going to have a quiet year in 2019. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, guys.